Well, good morning. My name is Jeremy Martin, Vice President for Energy and Sustainability at the Institute of the Americas. And on behalf of our partners, the Geothermal Energy Advancement Association, welcome. Welcome to the launch of our webinar series, Geothermal Across the Americas. This will be a three-part series exploring the potential of geothermal. And indeed, in this series, we'll take a deep look and have a series of webinars and panels, virtual panels, looking at the potential and outlook for this energy source across the continent, across the Americas, particularly issues such as intersection of geothermal and lithium production, but also other evolving innovative uses such as production of green hydrogen from from geothermal. And above all, we are eager in hope to look at where geothermal fits in the global energy transition, and particularly in terms of policy implications and investment implications, and just exactly how things are quickly evolving with regard to geothermal. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons why we want to frame geothermal in the broader energy transition is because of the need and the increasing demand for, as we've seen over the last several months, a wide range and an increasingly wide range of sustainable energy sources that will indeed allow for the balancing of climate action with energy security. And so as we look at sources, geothermal, we feel is one that continues to demand some further attention. And this is particularly relevant to what I mentioned just a minute ago about the intersection of lithium and the potential for lithium with geothermal. And in part of the energy transition, the spiking demand for critical minerals, obviously lithium is one of them, but there's several others, and where they fit in terms of how geothermal can perhaps be a secondary or even primary source of some of those critical minerals, particularly lithium. And in fact, the geothermal waters, the brines, as we'll talk about a little bit today, could indeed be a tantalizing new source of supply. So there are a host of new potential uses. There's a host of opportunities we think deserve some attention, and that is why we are kicking off this webinar series today with sort of a theme that we hope you'll enjoy: geothermal as a game changer, heat, power, and minerals. We have our second webinar in the three-part series ready to go. We're coinciding with World Geothermal Day on October 17th. So mark your calendar, same time, 8 a.m. PDT, 8 a.m. Pacific on October 17th. Mark your calendars for part two of our webinar series. And we'll focus a little bit more on the opportunities for low carbon energy that geothermal provides in Latin America, countries such as Mexico. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about Chile today, but we'll talk further at that time on October 17th. And indeed, I should finalize my opening by saying I was privileged to be able to attend the Summit of the Americas for a couple of days in the CEO Summit. And yesterday, the United States Special Envoy for Climate Action, John Kerry, referenced specifically geothermal and talked about how he wanted to put geothermal on the table as part of the overall effort to energy transition, but specifically with regards to a trip he's taking to Mexico on Monday. And he said that he believes that the opportunity for geothermal in Mexico is something to engage with the Mexican government about as part of the energy transition in that country. So I'm going to stop there. Let me just quickly share the agenda so we can see what we'll be talking about today, and also what will be our timeline, if you will. We've posed some questions for our panelists. These are the panel framing questions, and there we are, 8 a.m. Jeremy Martin, welcome remarks. Well, I guess I'm going to beat the clock on that and wrap up a little bit before the 8:10 timing, but I'm going to hand it over to Cecilia just as soon as I stop talking, and she'll introduce the panelists. She'll introduce one of our recorded interventions that we have, and she'll manage and moderate the discussion. And as always, please feel free throughout the session to pose your questions via the Zoom question and answer function, and Cecilia will try and incorporate those into the discussion portion of the webinar today. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my welcome a little bit sooner than the agenda says, and I'm going to turn it over to Cecilia to take the panel from here. And thank you all for joining us. We think this is a very important topic, and I've alluded to some of the areas that we want to focus on, but I'm going to let the experts take it from here. Over to you, Cecilia. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. My name is Cecilia Aguillon. I am the Director of the Energy Transition Initiative at the Institute of the Americas. So I'm very honored today to moderate this very informative and exciting discussion on the role of geothermal in the energy transition and its rapid market growth throughout the world, particularly in the Latin American region. Our panelists, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, including the Latin American region, of course. The panelists include Dr. Trey McCall, founder and CEO of Monteverde Energy consulting firm, advising and managing decarbonization projects, including geothermal projects in Western Australia and the United States. He has more than 30 years of experience in the energy markets. Unfortunately, he's not able to be with us today live, but I had the opportunity to have a virtual discussion with him, and we will share a portion of our conversation, which I think will help guide the discussion we will have with the rest of the speakers today. But we have live with us Mr. Chris Salton, Chair and founding member of the Geothermal Advancement Association. He is a veteran in the energy sector, and he is a former member of the board of directors of the Institute of the Americas and a non-resident fellow at the Institute. He's well known for actually writing very compelling and at times very entertaining opinion editorials on energy. Who knew energy could be fun? He is joining us from the United Kingdom and will give us a global perspective on the geothermal markets. Next, we will have Mr. Jonathan Weisgall, Vice President for Government Relations at Berkshire Hathaway Energy. He is a member of the Lithium Valley Commission in California and an adjunct professor of law at the Georgetown University Law Center, where he has taught a seminar on energy since 1990. He lives in Washington, D.C., but spends a lot of time in California, no doubt, a state with the ambitious goal to decarbonize by 2045 and counting on geothermal to provide clean, reliable energy and also lithium, as Jeremy mentioned, for the electric vehicle and energy storage industry. Finally, we will hear about the growing opportunities for geothermal in the Latin American region from Mr. Carlos Jorquera. He's the president of the Geothermal Council in Chile. He has extensive experience in the geothermal industry and is leading a Spanish language geothermal news platform called Piensa Geotermia, in English, Think Geoenergy. So you're welcome to read more on the impressive panelists' experiences and backgrounds from our website. And to get us started, I would like to play you a part of my conversation with Dr. Trey McCall. I have is, since you work internationally, where do you see geothermal having its its greatest growth in terms of regions?
So the greatest growth is going to be in areas where geothermal hasn't traditionally been particularly economic, largely because the technologies have lagged behind the geological or scientific understanding of what the potential is. Technologies today have changed radically since the last 2 decades, and certainly in the last 5 years, to the point where we can certainly explore for and develop geothermal resources much more effectively and efficiently than we did in the past. It opens up new frontiers. So geothermal is enormously successful in certain parts of the world, in Iceland, Kenya, the Philippines, and Indonesia, for instance. Geothermal accounts for 10 to 50%, New Zealand as well, 10 to 50% of power demand, or rather power supply, to meet the demand. And that's fantastic. But in other areas of the world, like here in Australia, like in the western part of the United States, in Canada, in South America, there are a number of ways that geothermal can be brought into the mix. The potential to utilize existing wells to access hot water is enormous. There are companies that are involved in breakthrough technologies to actually deliver the hot water from existing oil and gas wells, repurposing those wells, and basically turning them from oil and gas producers into green energy producers. That's very exciting, and provides an enormous opportunity for much of the onshore United States and Canada, for instance.
And where do you see it going up from these countries? So what's the next frontier for geothermal?
Well, one interesting type of activity that I see as having good potential is the co-production of geothermal and lithium, for instance, in many parts of the world, in Southern California, in the area in South America, involving northwestern Argentina and northern Chile and Bolivia, where lithium brines are produced. We often have elevated geothermal gradients in the immediate vicinity, and those waters that are supersaturated in lithium with respect to most other places are actually the same places that we can produce geothermal energy. So you can bring the hot water up, use it to generate electricity or local heating, and then evaporate it or filter it to obtain the lithium. So that's a hugely exciting technology. The real solution, or the real issue there are the areas close enough to energy demanders that the energy that's supplied is useful. One possible solution for that is, for instance, generating a local industry, in effect. When I was talking with a person who's interested in finding remote areas for Bitcoin mining, and Bitcoin mining is incredibly energy intensive. So if you can generate green energy rather than blue or brown energy to run those Bitcoin mines, you eliminate an enormous energy sink that exists today. Quite a fascinating possibility. The other solution that I think is really important is in those more remote areas where the power grid is either intermittent or non-existent, and the potential for geothermal energy as a local supplier is dramatic. We're looking at remote mines in Canada or Central Australia, for instance, areas where enormous emitters can actually bring their carbon footprint down dramatically. The other one is in terms of urea production and nitrogenous fertilizer.
I guess it got stuck. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, so I guess
you can use geothermal just to generate urea or fertilizer, as we're doing in a project I'm working on in southwestern Australia. That would be an enormous advantage that currently doesn't have any utilization in the geothermal community. So that alone would be a fantastic step forward for the community, I think.
That sort of sets up a lot of themes around geothermal. And we will continue with the speakers. It will start with Chris Sladen. I'm going to play, he has a slide, so I am going to just get it set up so he can talk to us about the global markets. And Chris also, he mentioned something about oil fields and geothermal. How exciting. Chris, you're muted. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, Cecilia, Jeremy. And I will try to build on what Trey has just said. Firstly, that geothermal is already a global industry, but is only developed or well developed in very few locations. It nevertheless has gigantic potential everywhere as baseload heat and power for the net zero challenge. It offers a route to decarbonisation. It's low carbon, zero low emissions, low footprint, baseload. And so it's ideal if it's paired, for example, with less stable renewables, wind, solar, tidal. Let me very quickly take you through what are some of the main resource opportunities. The first is what we call very shallow, low grade, sometimes low enthalpy heat, which is available everywhere in the subsurface, onshore, everywhere. And it's ideal for heating and cooling, replacing systems that perhaps burn oil or natural gas. It's accessed by circulating fluids through coils and loops underground, or sometimes by drilling shallow wells, typically less than 300 meters, and combining these circulating fluids with heat pumps. There are literally hundreds of millions of these shallow, low-grade heat opportunities, whether it's in homes, offices, warehouses, indoor stadiums, airports, glass houses. There's an enormous variety. There's also the opportunity to get low-grade heat from water that exists in abandoned coal mines and no longer used water boreholes. And these, again, can give us low-grade heat. Let me move on to talk about the possibility of repurposing oil and gas wells to extract heat. And some of this is more medium grade heat. And the retrofitting of oil and gas wells offers a totally new paradigm. The technology to do this is evolving rapidly, particularly in the US and Canada, leading a race to retrofit oil and gas wells and extend their life. Extending the life of the well, of course, postpones abandonment costs and adds to the commercial attractiveness. And of course, you already have the wells available. Some tests have shown 5 to 15 megawatts per well is achievable in certain conditions. And of course, the well stock across the Americas is gigantic, with 4 to 5 million onshore wells spread across the Americas. So imagine if 50% of these onshore wells could be retrofitted. In the US and Canada today, there are over 1 million
it appears that Chris is offline. When he comes back, I guess we will bring him back in. Okay, so now next speaker will talk about California. California is the largest user of renewable energy in, I guess, in the Americas for sure, and is very aggressive, has aggressive goals to use geothermal for not only, or actually it needs the geothermal not only for lithium, but also for electricity. Oh, Chris, you're back. I'm so sorry. Do you want to continue?
Yes, please. Can you hear
Sorry.
me?
Yes.
Yes, we had a power cut.
Oh, oh my gosh. See?
Just as I was
It's more
talking about.
geothermal.
Yeah. I'll just pick it up where I was saying that in the US, there are over half, and Canada, there are over 500,000 wells that are producing less than 2 barrels of oil equivalent per day, and millions of incompletely abandoned, plugged and orphaned wells, and the opportunity for geothermal from repurposing oil and gas wells. You can see onshore Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, all have possibilities. The critical component is to understand the amount and pace of heat transmission and extraction. Achieving 10 megawatts per well would advance the challenges of electrifying everything and decarbonizing local district heating as well. Imagine changes in the Western Hemisphere if 2 million oil and gas wells were retrofitted at 1 megawatt capacity. This would give you over 2,000 gigawatts, effectively doubling all installed capacity across the Americas. Studies now are even looking at offshore oil and gas wells, whether heat can be extracted for those. Let me quickly move on to the category of high temperatures and the possibility for power generation. The Americas, of course, has the Ring of Fire, the Pacific tectonic plates that are colliding and being subducted, giving high heat flows, as seen with hundreds of volcanoes, hydrothermal vents, geysers, hot springs, all the way from Chile. I'm not going to list all the countries, all the way from Chile up to Alaska. It's a gigantic resource base of hot rocks with high temperature fluids, often suitable for power generation. And sometimes accessible in shallow depths, sometimes just only 2 kilometers deep. The installed capacity today is only around 5 gigawatts, of which the US and Mexico lead, but the near-term potential is approximately 300 gigawatts across the hemisphere. Finally, let me mention also mineral-rich fluids known for centuries in the mining industry. The recent focus is on processing fluids for lithium, where the heat is a byproduct. With lithium now essential for electric vehicle batteries, lithium prices soared 500% in 2021. Extraction processes are advancing rapidly with new investment from vehicle manufacturers. The hunt for geothermal lithium is on, and it offers, of course, energy security. Let me pass back, Cecilia, now to you and over to Jonathan at Berkshire Hathaway to describe California examples in more detail.
Thank you so much, Chris. I am sorry, I was trying to put back your slide, but I had set up Jonathan, so I wasn't able to do it. Anyway, so we will continue with the discussion on California, and I will set up your slide.
Okay, ready to go? I
Yes.
hope we can solve any kinds of IT problems. Excellent. I'm Jonathan Weisskall, Vice President for Government Relations at Berkshire Hathaway Energy. Next slide, please. Trey, Didska, and Chris have talked about opportunities around the world. I want to come back to one of the traditional places where geothermal has been successful in California. If you see that map on the left side, that red square or rectangle, that's Imperial County, California, abutting the Mexican border. That is where my company actually started over 40 years ago, called CalEnergy. We were exclusively a geothermal company, 100% renewable energy back in the 1980s. We were fortunate enough to be acquired by Berkshire Hathaway in 2000, and we now have assets in 28 states and customers 12 million worldwide. We do a huge amount of wind and solar, but our DNA is in geothermal. That's how we started, and we've been operating those plants for 40 plus years. You can see there we are adjacent to the Salton Sea, the largest inland body of water in California. If you can make out the slide on the right, you can see that Salton Sea in Imperial County, and the yellow simply shows our geothermal assets, and that kind of kidney-shaped character with the blue outline is the general outline of the known geothermal resource adjacent to the Salton Sea. Next slide, if you would. We have about 29 production wells. If you want to move to that next slide, I'll get you an aerial view of that. And you can see there the view of the Salton Sea. Can you go back one slide, Cecilia? There we go. So we've got 10 power plants down at adjacent to the Salton Sea, 345 total megawatts. So we've got 29 production wells, 29 injection wells. We are high temperature, and this functions very much like other geothermal facilities around the world. We've been doing this for quite some time. We've got a workforce of around 200 folks. The injection wells are about a mile away from the production wells. They are, if you go to the next slide, you will see one of the challenges that we face down at the Salton Sea, and the next slide after that, you can just see the Salton Sea in the background. The challenge of geothermal down at the Salton Sea is that it's very corrosive. We are bringing up 50,000 gallons a minute of geothermal brine. 3/4 of that is water. It's under pressure, so it's not boiling, but it's at 500 to 700 degrees Fahrenheit. But the other 25% is dissolved minerals. And among those minerals, unfortunately, are iron, which is tremendously corrosive. That's one of the reasons that we have to line our wells with titanium. We bring up really the table of elements, a lot of manganese, a lot of zinc, a lot of silica, a lot of boron. And that makes geothermal a more difficult resource from a cost perspective. So geothermal over the last 2 decades simply has not been competitive with wind and solar in the United States. As one example, as a company, we have invested $36 billion with a B in wind and solar since 2004, virtually zero in geothermal. That is all about to change. And if you want to go to the next slide, I will explain that. Actually, we'll get to that in a second, but you can leave that up on the screen. We have because of that, the corrosion and the way it works, we have a workforce of about 200 folks. It's much more workforce intensive than wind and solar. For example, we've got 2 solar farms in California with installed capacity of greater than 500 megawatts with a permanent workforce of only 5 to 10 people. But all of that is about to change. We are on the cusp of more than doubling that geothermal capacity that's taken us 40 years to build out, that 345 megawatts. We are planning to add another 375 megawatts of geothermal over the next 4 to 6 years. Why? You alluded to this, Cecilia. California is energy desperate. Energy wants to transition to low carbon and desperately needs more baseload renewables. Quite frankly, the last thing the system needs in California is more wind or more solar. But with the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant planning to go out of business, to close in a couple of years, that may change. Once through cooling plants, there really is a need for baseload renewable to do, as Chris indicated, to complement and help out the intermittent resources. So the California Public Utility Commission, about 11 months ago, issued an order mandating its load serving entities, California's investor-owned utilities and California community aggregators, to procure 1,000 megawatts of what essentially is either geothermal or biomass power, renewable energy with 80% capacity factors, not weather dependent. That basically means geothermal or biomass. So we are responding to that order of the California Public Utility Commission and planning to expand those geothermal facilities. Now, that also ties into lithium. As I mentioned, and you can go back, you can now go to that last, the last slide up there. Thank you. No, you had it up there. Sorry, go back one, I apologize. As I said earlier, we're processing 50,000 gallons a minute of geothermal brine. 1/4 is those dissolved minerals. 250 parts per million, a rather small amount, is lithium. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you multiply out 50,000 gallons a minute and you can successfully recover or extract that lithium from the rest of those other impurities, the zinc, the manganese, the iron, the boron, the silica, we actually have the potential to extract as much as 90,000 metric tons of lithium a year in a world market today of 300,000. Now that market will grow at least tenfold, so we won't be the biggest players, but we are moving ahead with what essentially is a bolt-on technology. In other words, we're already bringing up the geothermal brine, so we're kind of halfway there. The challenge is to precipitate out the lithium without precipitating out the rest of the impurities. There really is, it is virtually zero environmental impact. We are adding some chemicals to alter the pH, but all of this goes back down 1.5 to 2 miles under the Earth's surface in our injection wells. The lithium facilities, unlike South America, there will be no evaporation pits or ponds, no open pit mining that we see for lithium in Western Australia, but really a minimal environmental footprint of recovering that lithium from the geothermal brine. And if successful, that could also be a huge shot in the arm for geothermal power itself, where lithium, if successful, could, I guess to coin a phrase, kind of be the tail that could wag the geothermal dog. Now, where are we? What you see there is the interior of a demonstration plant that we just commissioned 4 days ago with a grant from the California Energy Commission. It was a $6 million grant, and we matched that with our own funds. That is a lithium recovery demonstration plant that is now working and is successfully recovering lithium from our geothermal brine. The next step will be to, and it's at 1/10 commercial scale, where we've done this in the laboratory. It's obviously not alchemy. The lithium is there, but we certainly cannot go to full-scale commercial until we can prove this up at a 1/10 commercial scale, because this has never been done at this level before. The next step will be a 1/10 commercial scale plant to convert that lithium, which is in the form of lithium chloride, into lithium carbonate. If all goes well, we'll run those two plants together. And around 2024, maybe earlier, but the plan now is 2024, begin construction, and by 2026 go commercial, where we will be producing lithium from those existing geothermal plants that we have. Now, if the lithium does prove successful commercially, and we can do this in an environmentally responsible and commercially viable manner, we will also be able to produce lithium from the new geothermal plants we're planning to build, so we can essentially double that geothermal output possibly by the end of the decade. So let me stop there, Cecilia. That's a basic overview of what we're doing in California, where it kind of all began 40 years ago, but had remained dormant for the last 2 decades. So as far as California is concerned, we are probably on the cusp of the most exciting time for geothermal, really, in the last 20 plus years.
Wow, indeed. No question. It's pretty exciting what's going on. And as we continue the discussion, it would be fun if you could share something on the Lithium Valley and the grand plans and hopes for that region. So we will go on now to discuss Latin America. Carlos, please tell us what is going on, Chile, of course, but also in the rest of the region.
Yes. Thank you, Cecilia. I want to link also my conversation with what Jeremy was telling. And this is mainly the big question for Latin America. How to develop geothermal energy across deregulated markets. This is an important topic because one of the things a geothermal project is facing in this region is how to compete only in price with solar energy and wind energy, and not considering issues like the plant factor or the numbers of hours of production during the year, the need of ramp up and ramp down of flexibility for having variable renewable sources online. And we see this in Chile, like happens in California, where now we have added almost 5 gigawatts of solar and wind without storage. And currently our power grid is dealing with the maximum flexibility capacity it has to have a technical convenient operation of the system. Now this is becoming an issue. We are at that end point where we cannot add more solar and wind without taking in consideration that we need to add for each megawatt also flexibility, same equivalent. And we think there is an opportunity for geothermal energy. I did prepare this short 2-slide presentation, and I think that most of these points I'm going to discuss here are transversal for deregulated markets in Latin America. So first of all, geothermal energy has to compete with other technology for granting a PPA. And this is the main barrier a project has these days. And we had the experience in Latin America of becoming risk mitigation funds through the MIRIC, like in Chile, or GDF now for the whole Latin American market. Companies have been using those risk mitigation programs, but in reality, at the end of the day, we don't see geothermal power plants coming online. And this is the reason, is what I mentioned before, is how to get a feasible PPA for a project. And linked to that, I will say that now this conversation on lithium extraction, this can be another income for the power plant that can change the whole picture of the business case. In Chile, the geothermal the Geothermal Center of Excellence, SEGA, did a study if it is possible to recover only 50% of the lithium resources from Cerro Pabellón, the geothermal power plant that is producing electricity to the grid in Chile. If it is only to extract this 50% of lithium, this has an equivalent of almost $90 per megawatt hour. So that's a lot. That is more than a current PPA in the power sector in Chile. And so we think that adding this new business streams to the business case, like power, electricity, and heat and lithium, this could change the business case in Chile. On the other hand, under a transition where we are facing the way to decarbonize the energy matrix, we have the government set a goal to have offline all of the coal facilities by 2030, 2040, but the pressure is to have this done by 2030. And mainly what's happened there is that we are taking off from the grid base load that has a lot of inners, and by only adding solar and wind, we are not providing this type of service to the grid. And this is what makes feasible to have these variable renewable sources online nowadays. So in terms of replacing existing fuel facilities like coal or gas, natural gas, at least in this case, geothermal energy is a technology that can provide same services, can add inners to the grid, and those technical issues needs to be incorporated into the price. We said here in Chile that collaterals cost on solar production are not included in the price. So you can see very low PPAs for solar energy, like $20 per megawatt hour, but all collateral costs for bringing the energy from the desert 2,000 kilometers to the south and having congestions in the grid and the difficulties for building these huge grids from north to south and with a lot of community issues is not an easy task for having a sustainable development of the power sector. On the other hand, if you look Latin America, we have geothermal resources across the Andes. So geographically speaking, we can be producing electricity in every place on all of the countries along Latin America. And that's also it reduces the risk and the stress on a long grid, because you will have several points for connecting with geothermal energy. And in South America also, we are facing another hot topic, that is the permanent drought that is deteriorating the hydraulic generation. So imagine that this first half of the year here in Chile, we were producing a lot with diesel generation for having water storage for the coming month. So countries like Chile or Colombia, Ecuador and Peru, where the hydraulic generation is also part of the base load from the system, is facing this issue. And it's like with coal facilities, it's not just assuming this reduction in power production, we are also reducing electricity, inners, and other flexibility that is provided to the grid is disappearing from the grid, and that is not only a task to be solved with solar and wind alone. This is what I wanted to highlight here on this overview. So the main topic for the geothermal development in Latin America is the granting of the PPA, and most of the countries are deregulated markets. Regards Chile, the Geothermal Council, we have done a lot since 2013, and we have been helping the government on analyzing the development of the grid. The work done in 2015 under the renewable table, that output shows that by having a energy matrix with 30% of solar and wind as variable sources, that is the maximum capacity the grid can easily handle. We are at that level now. And also in top of that, we are taking off carbon, and the hydro capacity is going down. So there is a gap of almost 6 gigawatts that we need to build in renewable, flexible baseload, at least for Chile, for allowing the growth of the demand with solar and wind and 4-hour storage, for instance, in the coming future, and reducing the carbon emissions from the system. Also, another business in Latin America, at least South America, are these called energy auctions for the regulated sector. In Chile, we have the regulated sectors represents almost 45% of the demand, and there geothermal projects can compete with solar and wind, and we are requesting the government to introduce all of these technical issues that we are facing now into the evaluation of the offers. So it's not possible and not sustainable to see just offers during solar hours without taking care what's happened after the sun is down. This is something we are pushing the industry and the government to look more in detail into that, so we can compete with baseload prices in that tender. In the case of Argentina and Peru, they can do technological energy auctions where they can close a block of energy just for geothermal, and geothermal projects can compete there. And I think that these are the two main markets where geothermal can develop in the regulated markets, just to get a PPA with a big industry like the mining sector, or to participate in these energy auctions in different schemes according to each country. This was my presentation, and hope you get an overview on Latin America.
Thank you. No, I don't know why I can't get my, it says, oh, here we go. Thank you so much, Carlos, for that. Actually, you answered a question that was on the chat that said, you know, how competitive is geothermal with wind and solar and so on. I think you really did a good job answering that question there. But I wanted to come back. There was a question about injecting water in wells. I don't know, Chris, if you want to take that on, but I wanted to ask you about the issue, you know, with Ukraine and the shortages of energy in Europe and so on. How did you see, are there anything going on in terms of policy and incentives to boost geothermal production?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, let me address the Ukraine issue. What we're seeing is a wind down in the amount of energy that is being taken from Russia into Europe, and we're starting to see in Europe a pursuit of other energy options. So, for example, we're seeing LNG coming from the US into Europe, also from North Africa, the Middle East, West Africa. But we're also seeing, and what's interesting, is a significant uptick in, for example, shallow geothermal across Europe. And we're starting to see a lot more interest in medium enthalpy geothermal, particularly in Netherlands, for example, for heating greenhouses. And I do want to address this issue of, if I may, of using and retrofitting oil and gas wells, because I think it's a misunderstanding to think that all of this is trying to produce power, and it's not. It's often about producing heat, and producing heat for a variety of uses. As somebody once said to me, when we sold the Forties oil field, the press release talked about 50,000 barrels per day of oil production. But what it did not speak about was 250,000 barrels a day of hot water. And that, of course, is now being seen as a resource, whereas in the past it was seen as an unwanted byproduct. Thanks, Cecilia.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, in terms of lithium, there was a question about lithium and the environment. As you know, we all know California is very big on environmental standards, and I imagine that this is being discussed in the lithium conversations. So can you touch on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The Look, the fact of the matter is that lithium production, it has to work for industry, but it has to work for the community. And this community that is adjacent to the Salton Sea in California is enduring extraordinary health impacts simply because of the environmental disaster called the Salton Sea. Geothermal production does not encroach on the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea does not encroach on geothermal, but we happen to be located next to the Salton Sea, as you could see in one of those photographs. But there is already a heightened concern about the environment. I think the best way to answer the question is to say that, and you had asked me about this earlier, in September of 2020, Governor Newsom signed a bill creating what's now called the Lithium Valley Commission, which is charged with getting a report to the legislature by October of this year on a whole range of issues. I mean, lithium extraction methods, geothermal development, market opportunities, economic impacts, workforce development, but also environmental impacts. So we talk about that. We actually, goodness, had a meeting 10 days ago. We've got our next one on June the 16th. You can actually go to the website of the California Energy Commission or Lithium Valley Commission. You can Google and you can see those meetings, and the public is invited to attend. These are open meetings. So we do deal with that issue. I would say in general, Cecilia, that as I mentioned earlier, with what is really amounts to almost a bolt-on closed loop technology, we don't see major environmental impacts. We're not going to be drilling any more wells for our existing plants. We've got those 29 production wells that bring up that 50,000 gallons a minute. That's plenty right there. So as I said, the trick is to precipitate out the lithium. That does involve modifying the pH, for example, but everything goes back down. This is like a pot on a low boil with 29 production wells, 29 injection wells. And if you're simply pulling out that 250 parts per million, we think the environmental impact will be minimal, but obviously it deserves a fulsome review, which will occur. By the way, I should say, and this is in the chat, this geothermal resource actually does extend down into Mexico, near Mexicali, the Sierra Prieto geothermal facility. So they are related geologically, at least, but where we are does have a capacity for as much as another 2,300 megawatts. Right now, there's 400 being produced. We do 345. Another company has close to 50. You heard me say we'll be expanding by 375. There will be room for more expansion, though. But we've got to do it the right way, and we've got to do lithium the right way. This has got to work for the community as well as the industry. Thank you.
Absolutely. This is really exciting because given the stringent environmental standards and everything you guys are doing is hopefully going to be kind of lessons learned and best practices for development of lithium and geothermal in the rest of the continent, I hope. And thank you, Jonathan, for talking about Mexico. There was some people on the chat asking why Mexico wasn't represented. It wasn't because it was just decided not to talk about Mexico, but we will have 2 other sessions. Remember, this is a series, and in the next session, we hope to have somebody from Mexico. Carlos his experience is basically in South America. Central America, I know, has a lot of lithium. I am from El Salvador, and lithium is geothermal, and geothermal is being promoted for Bitcoin mining. So,
Cecilia, let me add shortly on Mexico. Yes, I would like to say that if you look, the way Mexico developed its geothermal market was done by the national electricity entity. So it was not in a deregulated market. And my presentation is more based on how to develop geothermal energy in the regulated market. And this is the case now with the change of the regulation in Mexico. They are moving into that, into a deregulated market. And you have seen that it is not that fast a development as it was before, and because now they have to address other issues.
Okay, well, thank you. I was going to ask you, in the region, in the central South American region, where do you see the biggest movements? Because you talked to us about challenges, but how are other countries in the region maybe overcoming some of the challenges?
Yes. So who is doing what now in at least in South America? So Bolivia is moving forward with this his Laguna Colorada geothermal project. They are under the construction of the 5 megawatt facility, which will provide with power for the construction of the 100 megawatt power plant. They are tendering out some technical services for the government. And yes, and Peru is just waiting on the energy auction, same as in Bolivia. In Bolivia, they are pushing also a lot the lithium concept together with geothermal. And in Chile, we have two big markets here. One is the energy auctions, where one of the companies is preparing this, so EDC from Philippines and Transmark Renewables is going in another market on small size power plant development, like up to 9 megawatts. And Ecuador and Colombia, they are working more on exploration, and at least in Colombia now they still need to improvement in their regulation. And in Central America, the push has been on direct use and the use of the heat for producing geofood. So GIZ from Germany has done a lot of efforts into that in Central America, and this is what I know from what other countries are doing.
Hey, Cecilia, Jonathan, let me jump in with 60 seconds. I did leave out one important environmental point, and that is water use. Water use down where our plants are, this is the Mojave Desert. Water comes from the Colorado River. There is sufficient water now, but as you look at lithium development and you look at more economic development in that area, water use will be critical. We certainly intend to use, we hope, 90% less water than occurs with the evaporation ponds in South America. But even still, that is certainly, if I had to list major environmental impacts, water use would be number one, and we're studying that and looking at every way we can reduce that. So I left that out. I apologize.
Oh, no, this is great. Thank you. Yet another thing, California is going to come up with something, that's the beauty of the state, thinking outside the box. Okay, so we're running out of time. I had just one question for all three of you, and that is 2045, California wants to be decarbonized, and I'm sure Europe and everybody else wants to do the same, maybe not by the same time, but by 2045, what percentage of energy would you say geothermal play, Chris, in Europe maybe?
Thank you. I think what you have to imagine when you talk about 2045, 2050, is what technology changes will there be? And personally, I believe the technology changes will be massive. We currently have technologists and universities working on neutron pulse drilling with the potential to drill to 10 to 12 kilometers. We've got pioneering work on what circulating fluids to use and how to create closed loops. And people working on oil and gas wells and how they might be converted. So I think when I answer this question, I think of the technology, a reasonable number, 15, 20%.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, California.
California today, geothermal is about 6%. I think that it will grow. I don't think it will go over 10%, but if the stars align and there are increased efficiencies, that will change. One great thing about wind and solar, they were incredibly expensive until they scaled up, and you scale up enough, those prices go down. If there's a scaling up of geothermal, the price will come down, and adding lithium will reduce that cost even more. So I would do a modest 10%. Come see me in a couple of years and we'll see, but it could certainly go higher. And the need for baseload renewable is absolutely critical in California, because I mean, there are days when upwards of 40% or more of California's power is coming from, well, there have been days when it's been hit 100%, and that's been mostly wind and solar, but the backup is critical. Thanks.
Yes. Carlos, Latin America, or pick one.
I
Pick a
can
country
tell
then.
you more on Chile. So we think if we do well, the industry does well, we will be in a range of 8 to 10% of installed capacity. Today is 0.2%.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We arrived at the hour. Jeremy, do you have any words of parting? Otherwise,
Congratulations. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Chris, Carlos, Jonathan. Thank you, Diana and Carlos, the Institute's Carlos, for your help in running this today. I think the question on game changer, maybe we'll do one of these again next year and invite everyone back and see if we've been able to scale, if that lithium has been proofed. I think I've heard a lot of extremely exciting insights, and some of them, if proofed out, if commercialized, if scaled, I think that's the word, Jonathan. Maybe that's my summary here. If scaled, watch out. That's the game changer. So thank you all. Wonderful. Mark your calendars for October 17th. That's part 2.
yes.
We'll definitely include Mexico. Thank you all for highlighting that. Don't worry, it wasn't intentional. And also don't forget, we have the La Jolla Energy Conference, September 28th to 29th. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful Friday and weekend.
Thank you.